Mr. President, land is the alpha and omega of the politics, the economy, and indeed the history of Zimbabwe. Before and after independence, land has been the central issue defining the national program of this country. Why is land such an important and emotive issue?
Well, land is our creator. In other words, people like myself were born in the country. And we got attached to the land because there was the livelihood of the country people, the peasants, and indeed the livelihood of even those who were drifted into town. It was on land that we had our residences, our round huts, on land that we walked, land that we tilled for all that we ate, and on land that the grazing was for our cattle, goats, and sheep. That was the life. Land is crucial. Land is part of me, part of others, part of our people. You can't detach yourself from land.
Why the emphasis on land and why not other means of production?
Land comes first. Agriculture first. You must take care of the resource that supplies you with total life first. The others come after. Yes, in an economy which is developed beyond a subsistence level, then you must look at other areas. Look at that which is grown on land, produced on land, as it gets added value in the factories. Then you have the manufacturing sector. You must look also on land as a source of the minerals. So to us, that entity, that resource, once it ceased to be ours, created a sense of deprivation, deep sense of deprivation. And as we, looked back after colonialism had established itself, the greatest loss that was felt was that of land. And people talked of the land they had lost to the white man. Shall it ever come back? And when we organized our struggle, the first of the grievances was that of the loss of our land.
So it was the main
fight
issue
for land.
It was the main issue when you waged the struggle.
Yes.
And again, if I'm correct, it was the main issue on the agenda at Lancaster House.
It was the main issue. It became the main issue at Lancaster House because of the very essence, that value that it has always had.
Perhaps,
yes.
Mr. President, we should go back to the drawing board and find out exactly what were the Lancaster House agreements with regard to land and redistribution of land.
Lancaster House constitutional discussions, yes, centered on quite a number of areas of great importance to us. True, the land issue was crucial. The land issue was uppermost in our mind. But then the land had been lost to the whites. And we had to think of the best way of winning back the power that we had lost, the power over land. But when we looked at this land situation alone, it was now in the context of the loss of our sovereign rights. Sovereignty then was the first thing. Shall we have sovereignty? How shall we have it? We said we would have it through the barrel of the gun after trying all the non-military, non-violent methods. We had to negotiate, of course, the modality that would lead us to our recapturing, regaining our sovereignty. And that's what the Lancaster House Constitutional Conference was about. So sovereignty first, one man, one vote, as we called it at the time, now one person, one vote. Yes. And one man, one vote would naturally yield majority for us. And that would mean then sovereign power coming back to us in that constitutional way, although the fight had been through a violent method. Yeah.
What did the talks say
and then,
about land?
Yes. Then, as we discussed that whole issue of sovereignty, how power shall unfold, what institutions we shall have, parliament, the executive, the judiciary, we then wanted to dwell on the issue of how the ownership by the whites of our land will now be ceded to us. In other words, how we were going to get our land back. And it was recognized by the British government that indeed the issue of land was fundamental, was crucial. But then the issue of how we would get it became the question. We said we wanted it back at the expense of the British, not at our own expense. In other words, we were not prepared to pay compensation for land that was seized from us without any purchase price being paid to our ancestors. So it was the obligation of the British to find money and compensate their kith and kin who were owners, legal owners of our land. We refused completely to carry that burden, and we were deadlocked on the matter. The Americans, the ambassador, and that was the Carter regime at the time, Carter administration, their ambassador in London talked to Sonny Ramphal, who was the Secretary General of the Commonwealth. America was prepared to fund the land reform program. And if our funds and those of Britain were put together, you would have an adequate fund. But we shall also, together with the British, appeal to the rest of the world, and especially Europe, you see, to assist you.
So it ended on that note.
The Americans went further to say that what they wouldn't like to do or to be known is that we were giving you money for purposes of helping you with land reform, including compensation. We will say it's land it's money for land reform, resettlement and development, without the compensation aspect, because the American national would not want to hear that money has come out of his pocket and gone into the pocket of a British citizen in Zimbabwe. That would create problems for us.
So there's a question of the technical language.
Just how we shall camouflage it. But how we will use it is entirely your issue. But from our point of view, that's the way we shall do it. Okay, when that happened, and we talked to Lord Carrington, he said yes, he understands America was going to give money.
The country's 1980 independence from Britain was conditioned upon the Lancaster Agreement, a constitutional mandate that nearly 80% of the land remain under white control for 10 years. And although Britain pledged to reimburse whites who voluntarily sold their land to the government, the agreement proved ineffective.
Why did it take so long?
Take so long to
come forth with this deal to compensate the country?
In respect of land they acquired for acquisition, it had to be on a willing buyer, willing seller basis. So you go to a farmer and say, we want your farm for a land reform. And if he says no, that's it. Says yes, fine, you acquire it. And that way, you will not acquire land in a manner which would enable you to have, you know, entities of land knit together. So you could then attach them to the communal area and get people resettled properly and efficiently. You'd get one farm here, another farm very far away. So we couldn't amend this until some, they said 10 years had passed by, you see. So we had to buy the Constitution. So we didn't tear up the Constitution, could have done that and said, it offends against the interests of the people. But we said, no, let's bide our time. 10 years will soon come by.
However, in 1997, British Prime Minister Tony Blair stopped funding the Lancaster Agreement. 3 years later, the Zimbabwean parliament authorized the resettlement of thousands of landless blacks on previously white-owned farms.
What was the deal they reneged on, Mr. President?
That Britain would pay compensation. That is what we agreed upon with Lord Carrington. They were also supported in regard to that by the Carter administration, and America committed itself to giving substantial amounts, as they said, towards land reform, and this money could be used for purposes of compensating the farmers.
What happened?
We reached the 10 years and we amended the Constitution. So acquisition now had to be in the national interest. That's all. That was in the national interest. And if we decided land, it was in the national interest that we acquire your land. Fine. Then we would work out what compensation we desired. And that naturally would be a burden for Britain to pay. We would, as we still are doing, pay you for the developments and improvements on your farm. That was our burden. But Britain had to pay the market price of the farm. And this is what these guys reneged on Blair, number 10 Downing Street. And that's the cause of the quarrel. And we said, if you renege on that, well, we cannot ourselves pay that compensation. It is your responsibility. We will continue to pay the farmer compensation for the improvements that he has effected on the farm. But we will acquire the land. So, fine, keep your money. We will take our land. It's not just personal sanctions, as they say. That's very dishonest of them to say so. When they say their personal sanctions, what they do behind scenes is to go to countries and say, you were giving credit lines, please stop doing that. They even, in some cases, were intercepting, you know, the ships carrying our oil from Kuwait IPG, and from also Libya. They would actually send people to say, we will pay you, you know, much more than the Zimbabwe is going to pay you for this shipment. You see, and that. But you know, the United States has been very blatant about it. And the message out there to our partners was that doing business with Zimbabwe was risky. So, and also the interference with the international organization, IMF and the World Bank. And they would actually tell them not to do anything. We had a meeting of the two in Dar es Salaam. Both of them came to us and said, there is no way we can extend facilities to you without a nod from number 10 Downing Street and White House.